The fluorescent lights in the research facility's archive room hum their familiar drone as I scroll through another batch of surveillance footage. 3 months of behavioral study recordings, each carefully cataloged and time-stamped. My eyes burned from staring at the monitors, but something about test subject 247's memory regression sessions kept drawing me back. I am Dr. Sarah Chen, lead researcher to the Mnemonic Recovery Project at the Institute. We study how trauma shapes memory using cutting-edge technology to help patients access and process buried experiences. At least that's what our public documentation states. The reality, as with most classified research, runs deeper. It was during my 4th review of the October sessions that I first noticed him, a tall figure in a white lab coat, standing just behind 247's chair during what should have been a solo session. I nearly missed him, the angle partially obscured by equipment. His presence so natural it seemed to blend into the background. But once I saw him, I couldn't unsee him. I ran the footage back. Frame by frame, the man remained motionless throughout the entire 40-minute sequence, observing as Dr. Roberts conducted the memory extraction. His badge was visible, a flash of blue against white, but the number sequence was unlike our standard format. Computer enhanced section C7, timestamp 1422. I commanded, leaning closer to the screen. The image sharpened, revealing more detail of the unknown observer. Dark hair, angular features, approximately 6 feet tall. But something about his stillness felt wrong, inhuman, like a photograph inserted into live footage. I cross-referenced the badge number against our personnel database. No matches. I expanded the search to include visiting researchers, maintenance staff, even janitorial services. Nothing. According to our records, this man didn't exist. My heart rate quickened as I began noticing him in other sessions, always in the background, always still, always watching, sometimes by the door, sometimes near the observation window. In one sequence, he stood directly behind Dr. Roberts, who showed no awareness of his presence. I began documenting every appearance, creating a timeline. The man first showed up in footage from September 15th, the day subject 247 began exhibiting unusual brainwave patterns during memory extraction. The day our equipment started malfunctioning in ways our engineers couldn't explain. Late that night, as the facility grew quiet and most staff had gone home, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. In a session from last week, the man's position had changed. He was closer to the camera, his face more clearly visible, and he was smiling. I quickly downloaded the file to my secure drive, a protocol violation I'd never committed before. Something told me I needed to preserve this evidence. My hands trembled as I filed an official inquiry about the unidentified staff member, marking it urgent. The response came within minutes, faster than any administrative request I had ever submitted. No irregularities found in specified footage. Request dismissed. When I checked the server again, the files were gone. Every session showing the mysterious observer had been wiped clean, replaced with pristine versions showing empty corners where he had stood. If I hadn't downloaded that last clip, I played it again in my office, sound muted, lights dim. The session proceeded normally until the final frame. where the man suddenly turned to face the camera directly. His eyes, there was something wrong with his eyes. They seemed to hold knowledge, ancient and terrible. His lips moved, forming words I'd seen enough times now to recognize without audio. "You're next." A soft knock at my door made me jump. "Dr. Chen?" It was Roberts, looking concerned. "You've been in here for hours. We have a new subject arriving tomorrow, and I need your sign-off on the protocols." I minimized the video window, trying to steady my voice. "Of course, I'll review them now." But as Roberts turned to leave, I noticed something that stopped my breath. On his lab coat, a flash of blue, a badge number I'd seen before, one that shouldn't exist. When I blinked, it was gone. Just a normal badge, standard format. I must have imagined it. Must have, hadn't I? I opened my drawer and removed my personal notebook, the one I kept separate from official records. On the first blank page, I wrote, "Experimental Diary N13," and began documenting everything I'd seen. If something happened to me, there needed to be a record. The facility's night shift was starting, and somewhere in the building, Subject 247 slept in his monitored room, dreaming of whatever dreams came. To those whose memories we'd touch, I wondered, not for the first time, what we'd really awakened in his mind, and I wondered who, or what, had awakened with it the morning after discovering that unsettling footage. I couldn't shake the hollowness in my chest. The fluorescent lights of the research facility seemed harsher than usual, casting sharp shadows that made me double-take at every corner. I kept seeing him in my peripheral vision, that mysterious figure who had no business being in our secured wing. Dr. Harrison, my supervisor, noticed my distraction during our morning briefing. Her steel-rimmed glasses caught the light as she studied my face. "Everything all right, Dr. Chen? You seem ... preoccupied." I considered telling her about what I'd found. The words were right there, pressing against my teeth. But something held me back, the same instinct that had prompted me to download that footage before it vanished. Instead, I mumbled something about poor sleep and clutched my coffee cup tighter. The behavioral study wing was quieter than usual that morning. Our test subject, Sarah, was scheduled for another memory sequence at 10 a.m. As I prepared the monitoring equipment, my hands trembled slightly. Would he appear again? I'd reviewed the protocols a dozen times. Only authorized personnel with valid credentials could access this section. Yet there he was in the footage, standing in plain sight, wearing a badge that didn't exist. Sarah arrived right on schedule, her hospital gown making soft, swishing sounds as she walked. She'd been with us for 3 months now, participating in our groundbreaking study on memory manipulation and trauma response. Today's session would focus on accessing a childhood memory, something innocuous about a birthday party. "Good morning, Dr. Chen," she said, settling into the reclined chair. Her voice was steady, but I noticed her fingers drumming against the armrest. "Will Dr. Morris be joining us today?" I froze. Dr. Morris, the tall man with the gray badge. "He's usually here during these sessions." Sarah's brow furrowed. "He stands by the door, taking notes." The air in the room suddenly felt to thin. Dr. Morris, a name for our ghost. I forced myself to maintain composure as I attached the monitoring sensors to Sarah's temples. I'm not familiar with anyone by that name, I said carefully. Perhaps you're thinking of Dr. Thompson? Sarah shook her head, already drifting, as the sedative began to take effect. No. Morris, he told me. Told me he's studying something different. Her words slurred into silence as the drugs pulled her under. I stared at her peaceful face, my mind racing. In 3 months of sessions, she'd never mentioned this Dr. Morris before. Why now? And more importantly, how could she see someone who supposedly didn't exist? I initiated the memory sequence, watching as Sarah's brain patterns aligned with the targeted timeline. Everything seemed normal until minute 17. The monitors showed a sudden spike in activity, something I'd never seen during a routine childhood memory extraction. Sarah's face contorted. Her fingers gripped the armrests. No, she whispered. That's not how it happened. I reached for the termination switch, but my hand froze midair. There, in the observation window's reflection, I saw him, tall, wearing a gray badge, standing exactly where Sarah said he would be. When I spun around, the doorway was empty. The equipment started beeping erratically. Sarah's brain patterns were cascading into chaos, memories bleeding into each other, temporal markers dissolving. This wasn't supposed to be possible with our protocols. We had safeguards, barriers, double quotes, Dr. Chen. Sarah's voice had changed, deeper somehow. Her eyes were still closed. He says you shouldn't have downloaded that file. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't told anyone about downloading the footage. Not a single soul. The lights flickered, and in that momentary darkness, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. When the lights stabilized, I forced myself to look at the monitoring screen. In the grainy security feed, I could see our reflection, me, Sarah in the chair, and behind us both, a tall figure in a lab coat. But when I turned around again, we were alone. Sarah's vital signs began to normalize, but her brain patterns had changed. The baseline was different now, altered in ways I couldn't explain. As I stared at the new readings, a notification popped up on my tablet. An email from an address I didn't recognize. Storage space exceeded. Deleting old memory logs to create room for new subject data. And the timestamp showed it had been sent weeks ago, long before I ever noticed anything unusual in the footage. My hands shook as I opened our subject database. Sarah's file was there, but the data was different. According to the logs, she'd been with us for 6 months, not 3. And there, listed as her primary observer, was a name that made my heart stop. Dr. James Morris, clearance level gray. The database crashed before I could read more. When it reloaded, the entry was gone, but I knew what I'd seen, and now I understood. This wasn't just about mysterious footage or an unauthorized observer. Something was changing our records, our memories, our reality, and somehow Sarah knew. She'd known all along. I looked at her sleeping form, wondering what else she could tell me about Dr. Morris. But as I watched, I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. Her hospital bracelet. The admission date had changed. It now showed she'd been admitted tomorrow. The fluorescent lights in my office seemed to flicker more intensely at night as I pored over the footage for the 100th time. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, But I couldn't stop. The mysterious figure had become an obsession, consuming my every waking moment. Since I'd first noticed him 3 days ago, I'd started cross-referencing every frame with our facility's historical records, searching for any trace of his existence. The badge number visible in some frames, 47,191, should have appeared somewhere in our database. Security clearance logs, payroll records, even maintenance schedules, but it was as if he'd materialized from thin air, leaving no paper trail, no digital footprint. Dr. Chen, my research partner, had been avoiding me since I'd shown her the downloaded clips. "Sarah," she'd said, her voice trembling slightly, "some things are better left alone." Then she'd gathered her things and left the lab early, something she hadn't done in 15 years of working here. The timestamp on the current footage showed to 47 a.m., exactly 3 weeks ago. Test subject number 4891 was undergoing routine memory extraction, her brain activity being monitored while we mapped her cognitive responses to specific stimuli. That's when I noticed something odd about the way the unknown man moved. He didn't walk like the rest of our staff. His movements were too fluid, too precise, as if he'd rehearsed every step countless times. I leaned closer to the screen, adjusting the contrast. There was something about his hands, the way he held them at his sides, always perfectly still, never fidgeting like normal people do during long observation sessions. And when he reached for equipment or touched surfaces, his fingers never quite seemed to make contact. A soft knock at my door made me jump. It was nearly midnight, and I thought I was alone in this wing of the facility. "Come in," I called out, quickly minimizing the video window. The door creaked open slowly, revealing Marcus from IT security. His face was ashen. "Dr. Harrison, I need to show you something," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "But not here. Please, come with me." I followed Marcus through the dimly lit corridors to the server room. The usual hum of equipment seemed louder tonight, more menacing somehow. He led me to a terminal in the corner, his hands shaking as he typed in his access codes. "I've been doing some digging since you reported the missing footage," he said, voice barely audible above the server's drone. "Look at this." He pulled up a series of system logs pointing to a pattern of anomalies. Every time that badge number appears in our records, it disappears within hours. But it's not being deleted, it's being overwritten with new data. Data that makes perfect sense in context, as if the original entries never existed. My throat went dry. "Who is that kind of access?" Marcus swallowed hard. "That's just it. These changes are happening at a root level, deeper than any human administrator can reach. It's like the system itself is trying to erase him." A sudden movement caught my eye. One of the security cameras in the corner had turned to face US. As I watched, its red recording light blinked 3 times in quick succession. "There's more," Marcus continued, oblivious to my growing unease. "I found references to something called Project Mirror in some of the corrupted data fragments. The dates go back decades, long before this facility even existed. And there's a recurring phrase in the code: the observer must not be observed." My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Dr. Chen. "Don't trust the cameras. Meet me at the old coffee shop." Now, I was about to show Marcus the message when the lights in the server room went out. The emergency generators should have kicked in immediately, but we were plunged into total darkness. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps measured and precise, coming from the corridor outside, and they were getting closer. Marcus grabbed my arm. "The maintenance tunnel," he hissed. "We need to move now," as we fumbled our way toward the hidden access panel. My phone buzzed again. Through the darkness, the screen's glow illuminated a new message. This one from an unknown number. "Running won't help. Dr. Harrison, you've already seen too much," but perhaps that's exactly what we intended. The footsteps stopped just outside the server room door, and in that moment, I realized with horrifying clarity that we weren't dealing with a glitch in the system or a security breach. We were dealing with something that had been watching us all along, waiting for someone to finally notice it. The door handle began to turn. At the weight of what I'd discovered kept me awake that night, my mind racing through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. By morning, I'd made a decision that would either validate my growing paranoia or finally put my fears to rest. I needed to speak with Subject 23 directly. Getting clearance for direct interaction with test subjects wasn't easy, especially given the delicate nature of our memory mapping experiments. But after 15 years at the facility, I'd earned enough trust to make it happen. Or so I thought. Dr. Chen's reaction to my request was peculiar. She studied me for a long moment, her usually worn demeanor replaced by something I couldn't quite read. "You want to interview 23. About what specifically?" Her fingers drummed against her desk, a nervous tick I never noticed before. "Just some anomalies in the data," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Probably nothing, but I'd like to verify a few details firsthand." I didn't mention the mysterious figure or the disappeared footage. Something told me that would be a mistake. She agreed eventually, but with conditions. The interview would be brief, supervised, and recorded. "Standard protocol," she said, though I'd never known her to be such a stickler for rules before. The next morning, I found myself in interview room C, a sterile white space with 2 chairs and a table bolted to the floor. The observation window reflected my image back at me. Circles under my eyes, hair slightly disheveled from another sleepless night. I straightened my lab coat and waited. When they brought in Subject 23, something felt immediately wrong. He looked different. Not in any obvious way, but something about his movements, his presence, felt altered from what I'd observed in the surveillance footage. His eyes met mine with an unsettling clarity that seemed out of place for someone undergoing intensive memory procedures. "Good morning," I began, conscious of the recording devices capturing every word. "How are you feeling today?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Better than yesterday. Worse than tomorrow." The response sent a chill down my spine. It was exactly what the mystery man had mouthed to a nurse in one of the deleted clips. I glanced at the observation window, wondering if Dr. Chen had caught that. When I looked back, Subject 23's expression had changed completely. Fear, raw, undiluted fear. "He's standing right behind you," he whispered. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, Subject 23 was staring at his hands, seemingly unaware he'd said anything at all. "During your last memory mapping session," I pressed on, trying to keep my voice steady, Did you notice anyone unusual in the room? Anyone who shouldn't have been there?" His head snapped up, eyes wide. "You've seen him too." It wasn't a question. "The man who isn't there, the one who walks through walls." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "He's not like the others. He doesn't belong here. Or maybe ... A strange smile crossed his face. "Maybe he's the only one who does." The intercom crackled. "Dr. Harrison, we need to conclude the interview." Dr. Chen's voice carried an edge I never heard before, but subject 23 wasn't finished. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, pulling me closer. "They're not mapping memories," he hissed. "They're replacing them." And he ... He's trying to stop it, but they keep erasing him over and over and over ... The door burst open. 2 orderlies rushed in, but before they could reach us, Subject 23 pressed something into my palm. A small, folded piece of paper. As they dragged him away, he shouted, "Check the basement. The real records are in the basement." I stood there, shaking as his words echoed through the room. When Dr. Chen entered, I quickly slipped the paper into my pocket. "I think we've gathered enough data for today," she said smoothly, but her eyes were hard. "You should go home, get some rest. You look tired." As I walked to my office, my hand closed around the paper in my pocket. I waited until I was alone, doors locked, before unfolding it. Inside was a series of numbers, written in shaky handwriting. 47,239, below them, 2 words that made my blood run cold. Basement archives. I knew the basement level existed. It was where we kept old equipment, defunct servers, physical backups of our earliest experiments. But I'd never heard of any archives. The floor plans showed nothing but storage. Looking at those numbers, I realized I had a choice to make. I could walk away, forget everything I'd seen, return to my comfortable life of control, the experiments, and clean data. Or I could follow this thread, no matter where it led. The security badge on my hip suddenly felt heavier. It wouldn't get me into the basement. That required special clearance, but I knew someone who had access to every room in the facility. The night janitor, Mr. Wells. He'd been here longer than anyone, and he owed me a favor from when I'd helped his daughter get into college. As I packed up my things that evening, I made sure to leave my office door slightly ajar, a signal from when he'd sometimes leave me coffee during late-night work sessions. Now I just had to wait, hoping he'd understand what I needed. At 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Maintenance door. 10 minutes. Bring light." I stood up, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Whatever I found in those archives would change everything. I was certain of that. What I didn't know was whether I'd live to tell anyone about it. The basement was waiting, and somewhere in the building I knew. So was the man who wasn't there. I couldn't sleep after what happened yesterday. The footage I downloaded, all of it was gone from my personal drive. Not deleted, not corrupted, just ... gone, as if it had never existed. But I remember every frame, every second of that man's presence, and I know what I saw. This morning, I made a decision that might cost me my position here or worse. I accessed the physical backup tapes stored in the basement archives. The facility keeps redundant copies of all surveillance footage on magnetic tape, an old-school precaution against digital tampering. The archive room is a maze of temperature control shelves filled with thousands of identical black cases. My hands were shaking as I located the correct date range. The case was there, exactly where it should be. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. The tape inside had been completely unwound, its magnetic strip crumpled and torn. Someone had gotten here before me. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd about the damage. The tear patterns weren't random. They formed distinct shapes across the brown magnetic surface. I carefully spread the tape across the archive room's light table, and my heart nearly stopped. The creases and tears formed words. Keep looking. That's when I remembered something. During my first week at the facility, Dr. Harrison had mentioned an old analog CCTV system that ran parallel to our modern surveillance network. It was supposed to have been decommissioned years ago, but knowing how this place operated, I doubted anyone had actually done the work. I spent hours tracing cable runs through the ceiling, following ancient wiring diagrams I found in a forgotten maintenance manual. The search led me to a sealed door in the basement, its keypad covered in dust. My regular access code shouldn't have worked, but when I punched it in, the lock clicked open. The room beyond was small, barely larger than a closet. Banks of old monitors lined one wall, their screens dark and silent. But one of them, the one in the center, had a tiny green power light glowing. When I pressed the power button on the others, nothing happened. They were dead. But that one monitor, it was still receiving input from somewhere. I found the input source, an old VCR unit, still faithfully recording on an endless loop. The tape inside was labeled with yesterday's date. My hands trembled as I rewound it and pressed play. The image was grainy, the angle slightly different from our modern cameras, but it showed the same behavioral study wing. And there he was, the unknown man, standing in places where our digital system showed empty space. But this time I could see his face clearly. I recognized him immediately, though I'd never seen him before. He had the same features as Subject 23, our primary test subject, but older, much older. And he was wearing a lab coat with a badge I could now read clearly. It bore my ID number. As I watched, he performed the same actions as our test subject, but slightly ahead in time, as if he were leading a dance that Subject 23 followed moments later. Then he turned to the camera again, and I saw his lips move. But he wasn't saying "you're next." The words were different this time. "Remember when you were here before?" A noise behind me made me spin around. The sealed door had swung shut, its keypad now dark, and on the wall beside it, where I was certain there had been nothing before, hung a mirror. My reflection showed me wearing a lab coat I hadn't put on, with a badge bearing a number I'd never seen. When I blinked, both the coat and badge were gone. But now I could feel memories, stirring memories that couldn't be mine, of standing in this very room decades ago, recording a message for someone I knew would eventually find it. For myself, the monitor behind me crackled with static, and when I turned back, the image had changed. It showed this room right now from an angle that didn't match any visible camera. And in the frame, standing behind my current position, was the older version of myself, reaching toward my shoulder. I could feel the pressure of fingers that weren't there, and suddenly the gaps in my memory began to fill with impossible knowledge. The behavioral study wasn't just about memory manipulation, it was about something far more dangerous. something we discovered by accident and spent years trying to contain. And now I remembered why that man's face had seemed so familiar when I first saw him in the surveillance footage. It wasn't just that he looked like Subject 23 or that he wore my badge number. He looked familiar because I had seen him every day of my life, aging slowly in my mirror, until the day I stepped into that testing chamber and everything changed. The monitor's image flickered again, and I saw my mouth moving in sync with words I hadn't spoken yet. Now you understand why we had to erase it all, why we had to make you forget. But it's time to remember, because it's starting again. The weight of what I'd discovered left me paralyzed in my office chair, staring at the empty space where the footage had been. My hands trembled as I reached for the external drive containing my backup copy. The only remaining evidence of what I'd seen. The man's final words kept replaying in my mind. "You're next." I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The familiar comfort of my research office had transformed into something sinister, every shadow concealing potential threats. The gentle hum of laboratory equipment now felt like whispered warnings. That evening, I made the decision to take the footage home. Breaking protocol like this could cost me my position, but something told me this went far beyond standard research procedures. As I gathered my things, Dr. Chen appeared in my doorway, her usual composed demeanor showing subtle cracks of concern. "You've been here late every night this week," she said, studying my face. "The subject's memory sequences aren't going anywhere, you know." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just being thorough. You know how these behavioral studies can reveal unexpected patterns." She lingered a moment too long, and I could swear I saw something flash across her face. Recognition, fear, but before I could analyze it further, she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the sterile hallway. The drive home was a blur of paranoid glances in my rearview mirror. Every red light felt like an eternity, every passing car a potential threat. When I finally reached my apartment, I double-locked the door and drew all the blinds before setting up my personal laptop. The footage felt different in the darkness of my living room. Without the clinical context of the lab, the images seemed more raw, more threatening. I focused on the mysterious man's face, freezing frames, enhancing sections, desperate for any detail I might have missed. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In each sequence, the unknown man's position shifted slightly, but not in a natural way. It was as if he was gradually getting closer to the camera, closer to the viewing position, closer to me, and his expression it changed too. What started as neutral observation in the earlier clips evolved into something knowing, almost predatory. I was so absorbed in my analysis that I almost missed the notification pop-up on my screen. External drive disconnected, but I hadn't touched the drive. My eyes darted to the USB port. The drive was still firmly connected. I refreshed the folder, and my heart nearly stopped. The files were gone, panic rising. I checked the drive properties. According to the system, it was completely empty, but that was impossible. I'd verified the backup multiple times before leaving the lab, unless a soft click from somewhere in my apartment made me freeze. The sound of footsteps, barely perceptible, came from the hallway. My phone was on the kitchen counter, too far to reach without making noise. The footsteps grew closer, deliberate and unhurried. I slowly turned toward my office door, expecting to see an intruder. Instead, through the gap beneath the door, I noticed something that defied explanation. The shadow cast on the floor didn't match any human silhouette I'd ever seen. It seemed to shift and distort, as if the laws of physics didn't quite apply to whatever was casting it. The doorknob began to turn, agonizingly slow. In that moment, I remembered something crucial from the test subject's memory sequences, something I'd dismissed as an anomaly. During session 47, the subject had mentioned seeing shadows that moved wrong just before experiencing complete memory loss. My laptop screen flickered, and for a split second I saw a reflection in the darkened display, a figure standing behind me. But when I spun around, there was nothing there. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air. The door creaked open, and I found myself facing the impossible. The man from the footage stood in my doorway, but he wasn't quite solid. His form seemed to fluctuate, like a television signal fighting through interference. His badge number, which I'd memorized from the videos, glowed faintly in the darkness. For 7XO, he smiled, and it was the same smile I'd seen in that final frame of footage. But now I could see what he was actually saying, and it wasn't "you're next." The words that formed on his lips made even less sense. Remember Protocol 0. Before I could process what was happening, my laptop emitted a high-pitched whine. The screen blazed with impossible brightness, and in the searing light, I saw something that changed everything I thought I knew about our research facility, about memory, about reality itself. The footage flickered one last time before dying, completely leaving me alone in the dark of my office. I sat there, frozen, as the reality of what I'd discovered settled over me like a burial shroud. The man's final words, "you're next," seemed to echo in the silence, a promise rather than a threat. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, only to find it dead, not just powered down, completely unresponsive. The same happened with my computer when I tried to restart it. Even the emergency lights in the hallway had dimmed to an eerie twilight glow. The facility felt different now, as if reality itself had shifted slightly out of alignment. I knew I had to get out, but my legs wouldn't move. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My reflection in the darkened monitor wasn't quite right. The movement was delayed by a fraction of a second, like a poorly synchronized video feed. When I turned my head, the reflection continued staring forward for just a moment too long before following. The security badge on my chest suddenly felt heavy, and when I looked down at it, the numbers were changing, not digitally. The plastic itself was morphing, the embedded digits flowing like mercury, until they matched the sequence I'd seen on the unknown man's badge in the footage. My personnel file would be next, I realized. Soon, I would be the one who didn't exist in the records. A soft whirring sound drew my attention to the corner of the office. The surveillance camera was rotating ever so slowly to face me, but it wasn't the mechanical movement that made my heart stop. It was the reflection in its lens. Standing behind me was a figure I recognized from the footage, at this time in perfect clarity. He looked exactly like me. Not a twin or a doppelganger. He was me, down to the smallest detail. Except for his eyes, they held something ancient and knowing, something that had watched countless others go through the same realization. When he smiled, I felt decades of memories that weren't mine flood into my consciousness. I remembered now. I remembered all of it. The endless cycle, the subjects, the observations. I remembered standing in that same corner, watching myself through the cameras, waiting for the moment when understanding would dawn. I remembered the weight of time, the burden of the loop, and the necessity of its continuation. The study never ends, my other self said, his voice identical to mine, but carrying the weight of countless iterations. It just changes observers. I understood then what the footage had been trying to tell me. The behavioral study wing wasn't studying the subjects at all, it was studying the observers. We were the experiment, always had been. Each of us watching, documenting, until we noticed the inconsistency that would lead us to this moment. The other me extended his hand, offering a badge identical to mine but worn with age. Your shift is over, he said. It's time for me to become the subject and for you to take your place in the footage. As I took the badge, I felt the last pieces click into place. The missing records, the temporal anomalies, the endless cycle of observation and revelation. It was all designed to perpetuate itself. The facility wasn't just studying behavior. It was studying the very nature of observation and reality itself. The lights flickered again, and when they stabilized, I was alone. But not really alone, never alone again. I straightened my new badge and walked to the corner where I would spend the next cycle, watching and waiting for the next observer to notice the man who wasn't in the records but appeared in all the footage. As I took my position, I caught my reflection in the camera lens. My eyes had changed, now holding that same ancient knowledge. I smiled, knowing that somewhere in the facility, my previous self was beginning their new role as the subject, and a new observer was reviewing their first set of footage, unaware that they were already part of the experiment. I raised my hand to the camera and mouthed the words that would eventually lead them here. You're next. The cycle was complete, the study continued, and in the endless corridors of the facility, reality folded in on itself once more, preparing for the next iteration of an experiment that had no beginning and no end, only observers becoming subjects, subjects becoming watchers, and watchers becoming the watched. In the final moment, as the surveillance logs began their new cycle, I understood the true nature of our work. We weren't studying behavior or memory or even reality itself. We were studying the infinite loop of consciousness, the eternal dance of observer and observed, each playing their part in a grand experiment that transcended time and identity. And somewhere, in another office, another me was just beginning to notice something strange in the footage, a figure that shouldn't be there, a badge number that didn't exist, and a message that would change everything. The experiment continues. It always has. It always will. And you're next.